When safety arrives, something else leaves. Safety did not feel the way Ivy expected. It did not arrive as relief or gratitude or release. It did not loosen the tension in her shoulders or quiet the reflex that made her listen for danger even in still rooms. Safety arrived as structure. The first thing Ivy noticed was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of unpredictability. Doors opened without keys. Elevators waited without being summoned. Messages arrived before she realized she needed answers. The world adjusted itself around her in ways that felt seamless and unsettling all at once. Nothing here was improvised. Nothing here was accidental. The city still stretched endlessly below her, alive with noise and choice and indifference. People moved freely through streets she could see but no longer touched. From this height, everything looked smaller, simpler, controlled. She had not been rescued. She had been relocated. Kang Min-Jae did not hover. He did not explain. He did not reassure her with promises of normalcy. He simply ensured that nothing reached her without his consent. And Ivy was beginning to understand that protection was not the opposite of danger. It was a different form of it. This is not the story of what happened after the danger stopped. This is the story of what began once the fear was removed and replaced with certainty. The quiet after impact. The first night passed without sleep. Not because Ivy was afraid, but because her body didn't understand what to do without fear. For weeks, months, maybe longer, her nervous system had existed in constant negotiation with threat. Now there was nothing to negotiate with. No raised voices. No footsteps outside her door. No sudden messages demanding explanations. The absence was disorienting. The apartment was expansive but not personal. Clean lines. Neutral colors. Nothing sharp. Nothing sentimental. Even the furniture felt intentional. Placed for balance, not comfort. Ivy moved through the space carefully, as if she were a guest who had stayed too long. At dawn, she stood by the window and watched the city wake. She recognized the rhythm immediately. The surge of traffic. The people rushing with purpose, unaware of how fragile that purpose could be. She had been one of them. A body among bodies. Easily overlooked. Now she was elevated above it all. Removed. Her phone rested on the table behind her. It hadn't buzzed all night. No emails. No frantic messages from work. No questions. That silence should have felt like mercy. Instead it felt like erasure. Ivy pressed her fingers lightly against the glass. It was thick. Reinforced. Not cold. Not warm. Just impenetrable. For the first time since the meeting, she allowed herself to ask the question she had been avoiding. What did this cost? Protection has shape. The rules revealed themselves gradually. Not through commands, but through limitations disguised as convenience. Breakfast arrived at the same time each morning, untouched by human presence. Fresh, balanced, predictable. When Ivy didn't eat it, no one commented. But the next day it was adjusted. Different textures. Different flavors. Someone was paying attention. When she asked about returning to her apartment, the answer came quickly. Not yet. When she asked about work, Min-Jae responded with the same calm certainty. You won't be returning there. She waited for explanation. It didn't come. That was the pattern Ivy began to recognize. Information was provided on a need-to-know basis, and she was no longer the one deciding what she needed to know. She could leave the apartment, but only with advance notice. Transportation appeared without conversation. Routes were chosen for her. When she suggested walking, Min-Jae's response was measured. Not now. Always not now. Never no. Freedom had not been revoked. Had been postponed indefinitely. And Ivy, who had built her entire survival around anticipating risk, found herself unable to calculate this one. The danger she knew how to manage. This new certainty had no edges to read. Min-Jae did not monitor her visibly. There were no guards standing at attention. No obvious surveillance. That made it worse. Protection, she realized, was most effective when it didn't announce itself. What power erases? The truth reached her in fragments, as most dangerous truths did. A former colleague's name surfaced briefly in a news alert, placed on administrative leave pending internal review. Another manager resigned quietly, citing personal reasons. A department was restructured so efficiently it looked voluntary. No one spoke her name. No one connected the dots. But Ivy did. The system that had once absorbed her silence was now reorganizing itself around her existence. Not because it had learned empathy, but because someone more powerful than it had intervened. When she finally asked Min-Jae what had happened, he didn't avoid the question. He answered it precisely. The system adjusted, he said. She frowned. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one, he replied. Ivy understood then that nothing had been dismantled. No grand justice had been delivered. The machinery remained intact, only recalibrated to avoid future inconvenience. Her pain had not changed the system. Power had. And that realization unsettled her more than fear ever had. Because power did not act out of compassion. It acted out of control. Min-Jae had not intervened because the system was wrong. He had intervened because it had failed to regulate itself. And Ivy, quiet, precise, invisible Ivy, had been the variable that exposed that failure. She was no longer a person the system could ignore. She was a liability that had been neutralized. A problem that no longer existed. The thought followed her back to the window that evening. Below, the city moved on. Above it, she stood protected. And for the first time, Ivy wondered whether invisibility had been safer than being fully seen. The weight of being noticed. Kang Min-Jae did not change after the intervention. That was the first thing Ivy noticed. He did not become warmer. He did not seek gratitude. He did not linger in rooms or ask questions meant to soothe. If anything, he became more precise, more contained, like a man who had already closed a door and moved on to managing the consequences. That unsettled her more than attention ever could have. They spoke occasionally, always directly. No small talk. No reassurances layered in politeness. When Min-Jae spoke, it was because something needed to be said, not because silence felt uncomfortable. It took Ivy several days to realize something important. Min-Jae was not watching her out of concern. He was accounting for her. Once she understood that, the dynamic between them sharpened into focus. His presence was not personal. It was positional. She existed now within a structure he controlled, and he treated her as he treated everything under his authority, with clarity and restraint. "You didn't ask me what I wanted," Ivy said one evening. Min-Jae looked up from the tablet in his hands, expression neutral. "No," he replied. The honesty caught her off guard. "Why?" she asked. "Because what you wanted required exposure," he said. "Exposure would have increased risk. And you decided that for me." "Yes." The answer was immediate, unapologetic. Ivy felt something tighten in her chest, not fear but recognition. She had encountered men like this before. Men who believed responsibility justified control. The difference was that Min-Jae did not pretend otherwise. "You removed me from my life," she said quietly. "I removed you from harm. That's not the same thing." Min-Jae studied her for a moment. Not as an adversary. As a calculation. "Being seen has a cost," he said. "You paid it the moment I noticed." The words settled heavily between them. She understood then. Visibility had created a debt. Not one she could repay with gratitude or compliance, but one that tethered her existence to his decision. Min-Jae had acted. Now the world adjusted around that action. And Ivy was standing at its center. The choice that was never offered. The conversation happened without ceremony. No dramatic lighting. No raised voices. Just two people seated across from one another. The city stretched out behind them like an impartial witness. "You will not be returning to your previous life," Min-Jae said. The statement was calm. Declarative. Ivy waited for the follow-up. It didn't come. Is that temporary? She asked. No. The finality landed with more force than anger ever could have. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. You didn't ask if I wanted that, she said. Min-Jae nodded once. I know. Then why are you telling me instead of discussing it? Because discussion implies uncertainty, he replied. There is none. Ivy leaned back in her chair, the weight of it pressing into her spine. She had imagined many versions of this moment. Anger, defiance, desperation, but none of them fit. Min-Jae wasn't threatening her. He was closing a ledger. Do I get a choice at all? She asked. Min-Jae considered her carefully before answering. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. You already made one, he said. You endured. The words struck deeper than accusation. You chose silence because you calculated that survival depended on it. I chose intervention because I calculated the risk differently. That wasn't consent. No, he agreed. It was consequence. Ivy looked away, her gaze drifting toward the city. Somewhere down there, her old routine still existed. Her apartment, her commute, the careful invisibility she had maintained. They felt distant now, almost fictional. You've decided my future, she said. I've stabilized it. The distinction was chilling. Min-Jae folded his hands on the table. You are alive. You are safe. No one who harmed you will reach you again. And the cost? Min-Jae met her gaze steadily. Your life no longer belongs solely to you. Silence stretched. Ivy did not cry. She did not protest. She absorbed the truth the way she had learned to absorb everything else. Carefully, quietly, completely. She had survived by being unseen. Now she would survive by being accounted for. Learning the edges of the cage. Time reshaped itself. Days passed without urgency. Ivy was given space. Physical, mental, but always within invisible boundaries. She was encouraged to work again, though not in the way she once had. Projects were curated. Contacts filtered. Information reached her only after it had been evaluated. She remained competent. She remained respected. But she was no longer anonymous. The world interacted with her differently now. People listened more closely. They deferred more quickly. Invitations appeared that would never have reached her before. Doors opened without resistance. Power cast a long shadow, and she stood squarely inside it. At first, Ivy told herself this was temporary. That Min-Jae would eventually step back, release control, allow her to reclaim some version of her old autonomy. But as weeks passed, it became clear. This was not a holding pattern. It was a new equilibrium. One evening, standing by the window, Ivy realized something that made her breath catch. She was no longer afraid. Not of harm. Not of being watched. Not even of Min-Jae. Fear had been replaced by awareness. And awareness was heavier. She understood now what protection demanded. Compliance without coercion. Gratitude without reassurance. Safety without escape. Min-Jae joined her by the window, standing close but not touching. This doesn't have to feel like confinement, he said. She didn't look at him. Then what is it? A recalibration, he replied. You existed on the margins before. That made you vulnerable. And now you exist within power. Ivy closed her eyes briefly. She had not been locked away. She had been absorbed. And for the first time since this began, she wondered whether survival inside power required something more dangerous than silence. It required resistance. The moment she resisted, the resistance did not arrive loudly. There was no argument, no raised voice, no dramatic declaration of independence. It arrived in a sentence Ivy had never allowed herself to say before. I don't want to disappear inside your protection. The words settled into the room and stayed there. Kang Min-Jae did not respond immediately. He stood near the window, hands loosely at his sides. The city reflected faintly across the glass behind him. He was used to resistance, used to defiance, negotiation, fear. This was neither. Ivy wasn't demanding freedom. She was naming cost. You haven't disappeared, Min-Jae said at last. Ivy shook her head. I have. Just more comfortably. That earned his full attention. He turned toward her slowly, studying her the way he studied everything that mattered. Not to dominate it, but to understand its limits. For the first time since this began, she saw something shift in his expression. Not anger. Not irritation. Assessment. You're safer than you've ever been, he said. Yes. You're protected. Yes. No one will touch you again. I know. Then what is it you think you're losing? Ivy inhaled slowly, grounding herself the way she always had, by telling the truth. My right to choose what risk I live with. The silence that followed was heavier than any command. Min-Jae walked to the table and sat, folding his hands. The posture was deliberate. Equal height. No looming. You believe freedom means exposure, he said. I believe freedom means consent, Ivy replied. Min-Jae exhaled quietly through his nose. Consent does not eliminate danger. I'm not asking it to, she said. I'm asking not to be erased by safety. For a long moment he said nothing. Then finally, if you step beyond my protection, I won't intervene again. The words were calm. Final. Not punishment. Boundary. Ivy nodded. I understand. And if the world harms you again, then it will be the world, she said. Not a cage pretending to be mercy. Min-Jae studied her, eyes sharp, unreadable. You're choosing risk. I'm choosing myself. Something passed between them then. Not conflict, not agreement. Recognition. The decision that changed the shape of power. Ivy did not leave immediately. She prepared. Not out of fear, but out of respect for consequence. She studied what Min-Jae had built around her. The systems. The access points. The invisible layers of protection she had taken for granted. She learned how power moved quietly, how it retracted without collapsing. Min-Jae allowed this. He did not test her. He did not interfere. He did not persuade. Power did not argue when it was confident. When Ivy finally told him she was ready, the conversation was brief. You won't have anonymity, Min-Jae said. I know. You won't have my shield. I know. You will still be watched, he added. Just not guarded. Ivy met his gaze. That's enough. Min-Jae nodded once. Arrangements were made. Not walls but distance. Not disappearance but recalibration. Her return to the city was quiet, unannounced. No headlines. No whispers. No spectacle. Power did not need applause to function. As she left the building that final morning, Ivy felt the familiar sensation of exposure return. The unpredictability of crowds, the friction of movement, the knowledge that harm was once again possible. But something had changed. She was no longer calculating her existence around fear. She was aware. And awareness, she now understood, was a form of power the system could not confiscate. What remained? Months later, Ivy walked the city without shrinking. She moved through spaces the way she once had, but differently now. Her posture was unchanged. Her voice still measured. But the silence around her no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to choice. She worked again on her terms. She spoke when necessary. She withdrew when she chose. She documented, but she also confronted. Not recklessly. Not loudly. Precisely. The world did not become kinder. But it became clearer. High above the city, Kang Min-Jae stood by a window much like the one Ivy had once stood behind. He watched the streets below. Not searching, not tracking. Observing. He had not lost control. He had exercised restraint. Ivy did not belong to his protection anymore. But she also did not belong to the system that had once ignored her. She existed between. Seen but not owned. Exposed but not unarmed. Free but not naive. She had learned what power could do. And more importantly, what it could not. The city moved around her, indifferent as ever. This time Ivy moved with it. Not invisible. Not protected. But fully, deliberately present.